All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Excess Succeed. This is Gearface. I'm joined again, second day in a row, not yet third day in a row, with Blue. Blue, thank you so much again for being here, still putting up with me.
Hey everyone.
Blue is here today to tell me a little bit about Giovanna, a character that I've seen a lot of people, a lot of new players, honestly, a lot of more experienced players request some tips on. So I'm very interested to get Blue's perspective on this one. A couple disclaimers before we get started, as always. Number one, we're going to be playing to win. On this show, we're going to be talking about playing to win. That is not the only way to play Exceed. I encourage you to play Exceed for fun. And if the lines of play that we're describing don't sound fun to you, please don't play that way. Play the way that you do find fun. Number two, uh, strategy on this show tends to be kind of prescriptive. Blue less so than most. He's a pretty even-handed guy. But you might hear him say, always do this, never do this. This is the most important thing. Don't worry about this. All of that, take it with a grain of salt. He's an expert, but even his opinion is just an informed one. There is no right way to play this character. And if we miss anything or undervalue something or underrepresent something, please let us know. Turn this into a conversation. Um, and then finally, if you are brand new to Exceed, welcome. I hope you enjoy your stay. There's a couple cards in Giovanna's kit called Slash and Dust. I will almost definitely slip up at some point and call these by the wrong name. They're also called Assault and Spike on earlier seasons. Just a cosmetic difference. Hope it doesn't confuse you too much. With all that said, Blue, help me out here. This is a character who has been um, I think from my perspective as someone who learned the game in terms of like breakpoint math, like the way that you win and exceed is you make an attack that does this much damage and it hits all the breakpoints and then you win. And we just got done talking about Sol and May, who lean really heavily into that. And now we're going to be looking at a character who I've seen other people, I think, ask similar questions about like, she can't do that. How does this character win? How does this character do her stuff? Tell me a little bit about Giovanna, please.
Well, Gearface.
That's
As
me.
always, let's start with the ability because that actually is a sorry, big and important consideration for how does Giovanna win.
Okay.
So, her basic mode, action, strike, hit, draw one. That means that so long as she's hitting the opponent, the relative cost of striking, initiating a strike specifically on her turn, is lowered because instead of getting an end of turn draw like other characters do when they take non-strike actions, and then when they take a strike they don't get an end of turn draw, she gets a hit draw, and it does not cost her anything.
Right. Okay. So
With that in
most
mind, she can strike a lot more than most other characters, and run them down of resources at the same time.
okay. So most characters in Exceed, most of the time, striking is resource negative. If you don't strike on your turn, you would draw a card. The sacrifice you make for striking tends to be that you're not drawing a card. As long as Giovanna's hitting, that's not a problem for her. Um, that that is an advantage, obviously. Is that the kind of advantage that I'm able to I get talking about it from the new player experience here. Again, we just got done talking about Sol and May, who have a big red +2 on their character card, and that is a very like tangible, measurable way to think about value. How should I be evaluating hit draw one? Like what is that in terms of? I think on the Sol lesson you called them goodness points. What is that for her?
Well, if we're evaluating it numerically using the blue goodness points scale TM, then we can
Right.
think of Giovanna's ability as generating one goodness point at no relative cost. So it is just a free one goodness point per strike initiated. And because it is a one goodness point that keeps our hand full, that means that we can continue to flex our ability to freely generate goodness points turn by turn over the course of the game.
Okay. So
And
every other
also,
character. Okay. Go ahead. Sorry.
if we're worried about red number, I can talk about the exceed mode. It doesn't give you the big flashy effect of a Solar May exceed mode where you get all of the power in the universe and all it takes is a small sum or your life savings, depending on which character you're talking about. But if we're worried about our card velocity, specifically the amount of cards that we're drawing, and we want more power, that is exactly what our exceed mode offers us. It does change our ability from, rather than generating free value, quote unquote free value, non-committal value is probably a better way to phrase it. It changes it into committal value. It turns us into effectively like Soul or May, where your strike actions have a resource cost associated with them, but in exchange, your strike actions are very spicy.
Right. Okay. And that hit draw effect is, again, there's no real like you cannot draw a break point. You cannot draw your way into stunning sweeper focus. But there is a value in that because every time my opponent answers my strike, they are either depriving themselves of a resource from their hand, and I'm not because I'm hitting and I'm gaining resources, or they're wild swinging to preserve resources, and that means that there's a decent chance that I'm winning the strike anyway. Is that how I should be thinking about this?
Yes, exactly. And as far as the wild swing versus playing answers from hand conundrum goes, the things that we should be looking for to accent our ability for exactly those reasons are forms of resource disruption or resource bolstering. So card draw or card discard.
Okay.
And with that in mind, there's probably already two normals that have popped into your head that do exactly those things: focus and sweep.
Yep.
Giovanna loves playing focus and sweep because focus has effectively a draw two on it, which means we are card positive on a fairly safe and easy to hit shape.
Right.
And for sweep, we get a draw and a discard simultaneously. So we disrupt the opponent's resource game and bolster our own at the same time, which is a multiplicative effect that is stronger than just having draw or just having discard. Although just having discards is great if you can manage to stack a bunch on.
Right, sure. If you discard 3, now your opponent it might really be in trouble. Okay. So we're going to be looking for ways to make this ability more powerful by compounding it with other stuff in her kit. Um, I assume, because this is as you called it, non-committal value, my character ability, unless it is in conflict with something else that causes a strike, I don't know if she has those things, but uh, I should probably be using this every time I strike, right?
Yes, effectively, you do not have the standard vanilla exceed strike action. You have Giovanna action strike.
Okay, you might as well just always do this because it will get you a card, and there's no downside to it relative to a regular strike. Um,
Yes.
how should I be thinking about her exceed mode? We've talked about now Soul, who had one that was like one line of play, crutches on it very heavily, and May, who's like her whole existence was defined by it. Where is Giovanna's exceed mode in terms of her like priorities?
Well, um, I will explain the theory behind the exceed mode, which I already touched on it a little bit, but I'll explain it in further detail, and I'll touch on it more as we talk about the kit. I would consider the exceed mode to be appealing, but a playstyle consideration rather than a do this or don't do this. And I know that's always a really lame answer to give in a guide of figure it out yourself, loser. Uh, but I have experimented with Giovanna's exceed mode, and I have found enough awkwardness with it because of the switch from non-committal value to committal value that even though the value that you're buying is very good, I'm not finding the combination of factors that make it what I want to do with my gauge. And I think that managing your gauge and throwing it at the opponent in the correct way is a big part of how Giovanna wins. So if you, as a player, the person that is watching this guide, experiment with Giovanna and try out her exceed mode and go, oh, I love this. This is how I'm winning consistently. Stick with it. It's great.
Okay,
I think I'm going
so
to keep doing other things with my gauge, though.
okay, so there is value, and you're not convinced. How do I put this? You're not convinced that using the exceed mode is incorrect, but you have also not really found a situation where it vibes with the way that you're playing the character.
Yes, the two big issues for me are the switch from non-committal value to committal value, and the fact that it takes a turn to do it. So even though the relative cost to exceed is low, it's 3 to enter, but it gives you a gauge when you flip because of the kicker.
Yep.
It's not a free gauge. You have to take a card out of your hand. Oh no. So it effectively costs 2 gauge. That is fairly low, especially for a character who has one ultra that isn't really an ultra. So we just have one big gauge payout aside from cancel stuff. Um, but I like cancel stuff. I think this character makes good use of cancel stuff.
Okay. So we're going to be building our own ultras out of cancels, as I said at the beginning of the guide, like these are the rules of Blue's strategy with Giovanna. They don't have to be yours. Probably nowhere more apparent uh, than it will be how you evaluate your exceed mode relative to your basic mode. Okay. So it's not like with May where we should be looking at every one of these cards like they always have +1 power on them, but we should kind of be looking at them like they always have +1 card draw on them.
Yes, and if you look at these cards and you go, "Geez, I really wish that with all the setups you're describing, everything did slightly more damage and my card velocity was slightly better in exchange for being a bit more committal," Exceed. That is
Yep.
exactly what the Exceed mode is there for.
Okay.
And that also means that you can filter for EX attacks much more easily, and that is something that Giovanna loves, is playing EX attacks, because when you have this much card draw, and spoilers, there'll be more in the kit, then EX attacks are really good for just stat checking the opponent, where a character like May will just use her ability to do that, and Soul will do like a cancel into strike to do it.
Okay. So again, hit draw 1, hit draw 2 is slightly intangible in terms of value. But if you form an EX attack out of that card draw, there are stats on that. And those stats are good. So we actually can sort of think about hit draw 1 as like there's a conversion rate or an exchange rate into bonus stats in some cases when you get an EX attack, and you often will with Giovanna.
Yes,
Okay,
it
cool.
is fairly easy to find EX attacks with Giovanna, and it's also relatively easy to hold on to some shapes to find the EX for them because of how her kit is built.
Okay. So my advantage is card draw while I'm being aggressive. The exceed mode is for when I have I need a little bit more juice and a little bit more velocity, but I'm willing to actually start committing resources to my strikes.
Yes.
Okay, cool. I gotcha. Do we want to hop right into the kit then?
Yeah, let's go for it.
Let's do it.
So I'm going to start off a little unusual for my guides with an ultra attack, an attack with a red border. The reason why I want to start with Tempestad is because I think that this is important for setting the tone of Giovanna as a character, and also how you should think about Tempestad as a card. This is not really an ultra attack. You can tell that by the fact that it has a 1 gauge cost, which means it has, in terms of exchanging cards from your gauge, it does not generate gauge, but it does not take gauge, because you're spending a gauge and then you're going to hit with this attack. It is an above curve card that hits at 3 to 4.
Right. And
So
so
Tempestad,
it'll put 2 force in your gauge usually by pulling 1 force out.
yes.
Okay.
Tempestad is a cornerstone card of Giovanna's offense because it is an above curve card that hits at range 3 to 4. This tells us a lot about our character. Our character is competent at range 4, not necessarily good at range 4, because we don't actually know that, because this is a fast dive for one.
Yep.
But at range 3, our character is probably pretty good. With that in mind, we should probably look to see what else we have at range 3. And spoilers, I put some other really great range 3 cards next to this one. But this card, within the context of Giovanna's kit, means that the opponent cannot con- confidently aggress into Giovanna if she has 1 gauge, and Tempestad is a card that is live, because if they initiate on curve with a card like Slash, then you can stuff it by playing Tempestad.
Right. Okay. And that would also deal with a dust at range 3, for example. In fact, honestly, I mean, like if we're going to be talking about a lot of range 3 cards in general, it's probably worth mentioning that like people call range 3 and exceed the mix-up range. This is
It is
where
exactly the mix-up range,
this is
yes.
where dive is real. This is where slash is real. It's where dust is real. It's even where sweep is real. And most characters have decent to good options, sometimes great options at range 3. So having something that just says like you have a dominant or at least very very real offensive or defensive threat at range 3 is worth considering on any character, but especially on one who's going to
Yes.
be able to like draw a lot of cards consistently. It sounds like.
Yeah, and something to keep in mind is because we have this above curve dominant threat at ranges 3 and 4, we can more safely play power boosts. A boost like, for example, the boost on Grasp, Let's Rock. And if the opponent flinches and passes turn back to you, we can make good value off of that thanks to Tempestad, because even if we don't play Tempestad as an attack, we can play it as its boost. And I will talk about both at the same time, despite that being a bit unusual, because its boost is basically the value of Tempestad as an attack, but into a boost, which means that you can play a suite of options and still have the effective threat of Tempestad live at the same time.
Okay.
And of course, if they do call your bluff, you can just say, I was being honest. Please take 4, and I now have 2 gauge.
Right. So this because it's an above curve option, it compounds anything else that you're going to put on top of it because it's probably going to hit. Um, so you get gauge with Let's Rock. Any other particular like card combos that you want to be using with Tempestad, or is it more just like is it Let's Rock for defense mostly?
Tension Rush. Even from
Okay.
even from the first turn of the game, we can Tension Rush and gauge a card, and we have that exact same setup live immediately.
Okay. Makes sense. All right. So that sounds like an opener for Giovanna. Just immediately get this online. Is this something that you are initiating with as well? I mean, it's got advantage on it. It seems like a strong initiation play, but an above curve attack at range 3 or range 4 uh is also, you know, like it is such a strong defensive shape. Is it should I more be thinking about it like there's no wrong way to use it, or is it they're more like there's a right and a very right way to use it?
I pointed to it once. I'll point to it again. Ray, the boost on Tempestad, is effectively the value of Tempestad as a shape, but with more flexibility because it is the Ultra and a Gauge, which both give you are the Ultra and a Gauge, and it's +1 speed hit gain advantage. So you
Right.
keep the hit gain advantage, and you keep the curve breaking properties of the speed effectively of Tempestad, but you can attach it to other cards.
Right.
So you can attach it to a sweep or the card next to Tempestad, Triple Kick. Triple Kick absolutely loves +1 speed hit gain advantage because it does everything else you could ever want in the entire universe.
Right. Now it does everything you want. Okay. So if I've got this in my hand and my opponent strikes into me, awesome. They're gonna take 3 or 4 and I'm gonna deal with probably whatever they threw out. And or else they need to address that I have this and I need to hold it over their head. If it's in my hand and I'm attacking, that's kind of what Ray is for.
That is exactly correct.
Okay.
And the existence of this card also forces the opponent into a 50-50 mix-up game where do they initiate with a focus or sweep to bait out Tempestad? Well, that opens them up to Dust, Dive, and Sepultura.
Yep. Yep. All of which are I mean and also at range 4, like okay, I block and you whiff your sweep. Like calling out an initiating with a counterattack where the counterattack does not hit is a pretty gutsy play. And then at range 3, you still have many mix-up options to deal with it.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So yeah, this is a cornerstone piece for me.
This is why I wanted to talk about it first and foremost, because this is not really an ultra. This is much closer in style and shape to a few season 6 ultras that are 1 or 2 gauge costs. A big one that sticks in my mind is Lina's Elusive Flash, which is a range 2 dodge that
Yep.
offers her a lot of defensive utility at her favorite range. And just like SF crit specials in general, Street Fighter crit specials, which are all effectively 1 gauge ultras, they're just printed onto specials because of this season mechanic in that set.
Right. Yeah, I was actually thinking like this actually has a little bit in common with like a Ryu Hadoken as a defensive threat, but this one's obviously moving me in instead. Um, so I need to be okay with depositioning myself when I'm using this card. I'm good at range 3. Hopefully, I'm also good at range 1, or else I probably shouldn't be doing this at all. Um, so that remains to be seen as we get into the rest of my kit. But when I'm at this
Something to keep
range.
in mind is even if our kit doesn't offer us a lot of range 1 utility, which, spoilers, it does actually augment the utility, the already extant utility of normals well with one of our cards. We love playing Focus and Sweep so much that just hopping in to range 1 to play some slows and trade a little bit better than our opponent because we're generating goodness points for free,
Right.
that's a pretty reasonable thing to do.
Okay, sounds good. So I will happily go into range one just to play the good range one cards that everybody has, with the added synergy that I'm getting goodness point wise for my ability. That makes sense to me. Where to next, Blue?
Let's move on to the next card. I already mentioned Triple Kick as being a card that does everything we want except gain advantage. Let's observe why it is that this card is so nice. 1 to 3, 2, 5 is a pretty lackluster printed stat line. So let's move on to the hit effect. Hit, draw 2, spend up to 3 force for each force spent plus 1 power.
Right.
You should probably be reading that not as hit, draw 2, but hit, draw 3 or hit, draw 4, depending on if you're in Exceed mode or Basic mode.
Right.
So hit, draw 3 is a lot of card velocity even before we enter our Exceed mode. So if we ever need a hand refill, Triple Kick's got our back. And then from there, we have a non-committal decision to make, which is how much force do we want to spend on Triple Kick for trade value? 1 force for 1 power, as I established when talking about May, is a lackluster rate to buy power, but sometimes it still is worth doing. If you run into an opponent's Dust, for example, a card that has 4 guard, you should probably spend on Triple Kick to stun the Dust, which means you're
Sure.
spending the full 3.
Sure. I mean, the
And
big advantage here is that I'm doing it after reveal timing. I know exactly
yeah,
what I'm spending to, so I can say, all right, cool, take 5 damage if you need to.
yeah, and in the situations where you don't need to stun a Dust or an EX attack, and you're pretty comfortable with just hitting the opponent for like 2 or 3 damage, this card is just a big ass draw.
Yep.
And
Okay.
you get to see all the cards, assuming you time your hit effects correctly. You time it so that you draw from Giovanna's ability and then Triple Kick, which most people are not going to correct you if you just lump all of those together, but that is how you should do it, so that you have all of the cards available to you before you have to spend force.
Okay, because I can order my hit effects however I want, so I should probably get the one that will actually get me more cards so I can spend them if I need to. If that makes sense. And
Yes.
so it's on curve at 3. 2 damage is whatever. It could be 5 damage, which is less whatever, but that's committal of resources, and I might not want to do it. Um, it's also, I mean, just another on curve option at range 5, range 3. Cool. We got some overlap with slash there. When I do Ray on top of it, now it's above curve. Now it's gaining advantage as well. Um, I mean, that all sounds awesome. Above curve
Yeah.
gain advantage on its own sounds pretty incredible.
Yeah, and something to remember, and I mentioned this, I believe, with Soul. When you have card draw stacked with advantage, similar to draw discard, draw opponent discard, the effects are not just the effective advantage, which is effectively 2 cards,
Right.
because you can on your advantage turn prep,
Right.
which Giovanna isn't usually going to do, but on your advantage turn you can prep, so the minimum value of advantage is 2 cards, 2 goodness points. When you add card draw on top of it, it isn't just adding the value of that card draw to the value of advantage, it actually, like, multiplies them. Because when you're seeing more options, even if you get disrupted by, say, an opponent sweep, if you drew, like, 3 or 4 cards at the same time, they can't really meaningfully disrupt you because you probably have a plan A, B, and C that you just drew into, even if you had no cards in hand to start with. Especially when you have a lot of strong range 3 options, like we're already starting to see form in Giovanna's kit just off of the normals that exist at range 3, Triple Kick, and Sepultura, which I already mentioned as another card that is relevant
Okay.
at range 3.
So I've heard it said before by people who value this kind of like card value calculations of exceed that like the real reason that slash trades down into sweep, for example, is not damage. It's that it's that sweep steals a card from your hand. Whether or not you believe that is true or whether or not you ascribe to that particular philosophy of exceed, triple kick gets rid of that problem because you will be drawing more than they are pulling from you. Is that
Yes.
okay? That makes
And
sense to me.
you can actually look at the standard slash sweep exchange and remember that we have hit draw 1, and that pain of a random discard is only that it is random
Right.
compared to the average character. And I would even say that for most characters, assuming they actually have a thing they want to do at range 1, slash into sweep is probably still your worst case, but isn't actually that bad.
Yeah. And as
Slash into
long
focus is straight up fine.
right. As long because advantage is a powerful mechanic. As long as the thing that they are pulling is not the one thing that you wanted to play.
Yes.
Into slash. So triple kick is not forcing you to range 1, it's keeping you at range 3. You are getting cards out of it, which means that you are probably in a target rich environment for plans, as you said, plan A, plan B, plan C. There's a lot of kind of intangibles that go into making this way more benefit. I'm sorry, as long as you have Ray on it, as long as you're gaining advantage. If you run into sweep with that, you're like, well, okay, that's fine. Because you have other stuff you can do afterward.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And coming back to the even regular use case for triple kick, because I play a lot of non-ray triple kicks as well, even though ray triple kick is very good. It still is not the worst to trade into sweep because you get to choose exactly how much you are committing to the strike. Obviously, hitting the sweep for 2 feels bad, but
Yep.
hitting the sweep for 2 on defense and getting a whole bunch of card draw that you can then leverage on your turn, and you basically get to choose whether or not your card draw is real card draw or not, is still pretty good. And this is
Right.
still an above curve option, so as a defensive option, it's not terrible, especially EX.
Okay. Okay. So I can still I can defend with this, and now I've got the advantage from Ray, just riskier because I'm taking the next turn anyway if I did it on defense.
Yes.
Okay, makes sense. So
Which
good defensive option because I'm getting card draw. Good offensive option because I'm getting card draw and I can decide what to spend.
and enabled by Ray, which spoilers, a lot of the kit is going to be enabled by Ray. Ray is I think that managing your Tempest odds and using them well is a very important part of playing Giovanna well, because advantage is really strong. +1 speed is a very potent enabler, especially for a character like Giovanna that is leaning less on overwhelming, crushing mid speeds and more on pressure. A lot of unending pressure, working the opponent's hand down and making it so that now that they're stuck having to choose between like defending with one of like 2 cards in their hand or wild swinging into a card that it has a decent chance of losing to a triple kick type shape.
Right. Right. This is just consistent unless they happen to pull this particular sweep. Okay, you're probably going to do just fine with triple kick. I feel like as we're getting into this, like there's an element of there's an element around the offensive discourse in Exceed of like why attack when you can block. Like these are not unbeatable, right? Like triple kick loses trades down into sweep. Like these have counters. I came up on Exceed with like this guy over here who puts down a boost and then says I win the next strike or whatever. My understanding of this game is kind of still inflected by that, and I think a lot of people's are. So when we're talking about a character with like slightly lower power values who's not really going to just crushingly win when they set up, you need to be leveraging this tempo, this
Yeah,
pressure
that
in order to
is
get anything done.
that is the exact advantage that you have relative to many other characters is the ability to just never ever let off the gas. That is exactly what our hit draw ability offers us.
Okay. So
And that is exactly what triple kick bolsters for us is it gives us extra card velocity even when we're not using our exceed mode.
I see. Okay. So in the long term, that means my opponent is going to run out of mix-up options. My opponent is gonna leave holes in their defenses that I can then start exploiting. But in the short term, that means like I bet you haven't drawn that sweep yet because I've been
More or
hitting
less,
you
yeah.
every single turn, and eventually you're gonna run out of like not like global cards but local cards. The things that you have access to are going to go down, and now I can leverage that like temporary weakness. Is that how I should be thinking
And
about that?
Yeah, and for the short term, for the early game, where everyone gets a pretty deep mulligan and thus is able to see a suite of options in their hand that they have curated to a degree,
Hmm.
let's move on to Sepultura. Why attack when you can block? Well, what if I beat your blocks? Which this doesn't literally beat block. We need to play dust if we want to literally beat block. But
Right.
the block like effects in Exceed, cards with guard, this covers them at range 3 in a relatively safe and non-committal shape. It's another 1 to 3. It's a 1 to 3 with after close or retreat 1. So at range 3, if we play this and the opponent plays sweep, we can step back to range 4, which we at least have Tempestad to help us when we get to range 4 if
Right.
we need to get back in, because it looks a lot like from what we've seen thus far that we mostly want to be at range 3 as far as what our preferred range is of the two that Tempestad is clearly earmarking as places to look for.
Yeah, definitely. So
And
I can mid speed dodge my way out of a sweep with this. If they block, as you were saying, they're losing a card as well.
they lose a card, we draw a card. So
Yep.
it's painful, even though it's not the worst thing to block in the universe. You can think of it as a more consistent miniature version of sweep.
Okay.
So we
Gotcha.
trade 2 power for 2 speed, which also notably means that if we Ray with Sepultura, that we have after closer retreat 1 on a hit gain advantage at 5 speed, so it's on curve. So a safe on curve shape that we can confirm power and economic disruption onto. I think you can already start to see why I said that Ray is an important tool for us as well.
Yeah, and I mean when if you were talking earlier about how draw two is valuable with advantage, card disruption is valuable with advantage too, because now if they just lost an important card, I get to jump on that hole in their defenses immediately.
Yep.
Okay. Um as we're because you just mentioned like, all right, Ray cancel into Sepultura. That shape is a good shape to confirm power onto. That implies to me that I might be doing occasionally like longer than one cancel chains. Is that a common thing for Giovanna? Am I doing like longer combos on my turn than I would be with somebody like Sol or May?
That is an option. Giovanna actually naturally builds a decent amount of gauge, so you actually do have the option to do a 2 or 3 cancel chain and have it be a reasonable decision. I have definitely done that and had it a feel really cool and be reasonable.
Okay.
But rather than think of it as the power that we get via canceling 4 power, which is mostly just going to be badass,
Right.
which is a card that we really want to play as an attack.
Right.
You can
Right.
think of it more as Giovanna has very potent 2 turn setups that she can play where the threat of Tempestad makes it awkward for the opponent to contest them, and then we can leverage the value of Ray as a boost to confirm those 2 turn setups. So
Okay.
I already mentioned Tension Rush and Let's Rock. Those are actually the big tools for said 2 turn setups. This one keeps cards flowing into your hand. So keeps you at a relatively high hand while bolstering the threat of your next strike, and naturally threatening Tempestad.
Okay.
Tension Rush sets up Tempestad even from the word go at the cost of cards. But luckily, because we're Giovanna and we have a strong economy, just off of the things that we've seen thus far, we have a strong economy.
Right.
Um, Taking the worst card in our hand, probably block, and throwing it into gauge is not the end of the world.
Right. Okay. So I put these cards down at a range where Tempestad hits. I say hit me. If they don't, Ray into triple kick, into Sepultura, into whatever I want, and now I've confirmed quite a bit of value off of the threat of Tempestad, and then cashed out with it by boosting it.
Yes, and you can also think of it another way. Every instance where I say you can confirm power by using Ray, you can mentally think of that as if I have 2 gauge in Exceed mode, Ray is cracked.
Okay, sure. So I just get to say, here's power all the time. This is the other. I mean, this isn't cancelable, but it results in a strike. Um, this is the other source of power along with badass in my kit that I could use with Ray.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I do like +1 power, +1 speed, hit gain advantage. That sounds like a pretty good boost.
Yeah, and hit draw too at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. 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 All right. Tight. 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 I'm good with that. So,
So
all right. Ray
I
enables
do
all
I do
these
want to
things.
emphasize again, I don't like the Exceed mode because it takes a turn to get there, and taking a card out of your hand while also taking a downturn to make sure that you have the resources to use them, and then also having a lot more resource pressure placed on you, I find awkward. But if you find the character lacking in power and you are more willing to do some gauge micromanagement in the mid to late game for very strong payouts, Giovanna's Exceed mode is great for that.
Okay. Gotcha. That makes sense. And if you can get that turn, if you have a resource overage from using your ability well, you might be able to make use of that game by game. Um, shall we move on to is it pronounced Travau? I have no
I
idea
think
how
it's
to say
Travell.
this. Okay, yeah,
Um, I do want to note one more thing about Sepultura and Triple Kick, which I mentioned
please.
implicitly, but I want to say explicitly because I feel like I've been missing out on a couple things that I wanted to say explicitly in the past couple guides.
Yeah.
Um, Sepultura and Triple Kick both, because of how they're shaped, they are relatively consistent. And specifically, they are 4 speed, which is literally the middle speed of Exceed, and 5 speed, which is slightly faster than the middle speed of Exceed for range 3.
Yep.
Um, they beat random cards very often. So playing them naked, pretty reasonable decision. Especially if you're expecting the opponent to wild swing because you have pressured their resources so much. These cards often will just work. So if you're confirming 4 damage and not eating a retaliation, you're chilling. That's basically, a big swing of resources in your direction, even before the draw and random discard that it has attached to it.
Okay.
And
So
that's
so
that's a big part of rushdown theory is when you win a strike clean, which Sepultura is a card that is designed to win a strike clean. Triple Kick is going to usually win strikes in more pyrrhic ways, unless it hits something with no guard, in which case you just owned the opponent and stole their launch money. But Sepultura, when it wins, it is going to win clean, just like mid speeds, which
yeah.
means every bit of value that it generates in the process is huge because the opponent is getting no value out of that strike.
Okay. So that's rushdown theory, as you were saying, that I'm not just trying to throw strikes. I'm not just trying to do more damage to my opponent. I am trying to win clean and get value out of things on my turn. And
Yes, and
and
and Sepultura is a card that cares a lot about speed ties, even before we account for our ability, wanting us to strike all the time, anyways.
right. Okay, because this mid speed shape, this 4 speed that beats a lot of random things, if my opponent is initiating instead, it's a mid-speed shape that would lose to a lot of things, right? Like it's just on
Yeah,
that cusp.
the
It's on that tipping point where if the speed tie goes the other direction, suddenly this is much worse.
the difference maker on paper is whether or not you beat Dive, but any character that has a 4 speed shape that they like playing like Dive, that is also a difference maker. So a card like Soul's Fafnir, for example,
Yep.
that is a 4 speed, very dumb, very threatening mid speed. Um, and if you initiate into Soul, Fafnir is not a card he's going to defend with most of the time, anyways. Notably, Soul actually has kind of weird defenses, but this turns off those mid speed threats and also covers the most threatening things that people often will play on defense, focus
Yeah.
and sweep.
Right. Because you can just step out of them afterward. Okay. So I'm winning clean with this when I win with it at all. It is not so far below curve that I'm taking a gigantic risk by like they do need to defend on curve with this if they're gonna beat it out at all, which means that they're going to need to deal with this mix up with triple kick that I've got that would absolutely, as you said, really, really, really destroy Slash. This is already scary.
Yeah. And with that in mind, the fact that we have a fairly workable mix-up between three relatively appealing options, so even if they want to play EX Slash, they can't necessarily defend with it.
Right, right.
Let's move on to Travau.
Okay.
Now we're getting into the utility. These are wow. This makes me really want to play Giovanna. So let's talk about the things that make it so that the character doesn't just have some matchups where they suffer.
Okay.
Travau. we talked about Night Vortex in the Soul Guide, and this is numerically worse Night Vortex in pretty much every conceivable way. It
Yeah,
is the same printed stats except a lower printed guard, and it does not have a rider that gives you card draw. It doesn't have a rider that gives you card draw because we have a rider that gives us card draw.
right.
So why does Giovanna have a numerically worse version of Night Vortex or a couple other shapes that I don't feel like talking about because they're not my tutorials? She has it because she has so much card velocity throughout her kit that she doesn't necessarily need a 6 guard Travail. She would love to have a 6 guard Travail, and in another universe, she probably got a 6 guard Travail, but she can deal with the 5 guard Travail because she mostly she doesn't want to be crouching on this on defense, and she has a defensive tool anyways that the opponent has to call out in a very different way to how they would call out Travail. So because we have a workable mix-up on defense at range 4, where you would be playing Travail range 4, range 1, um, we can think of this as less like, oh, woe is Giovanna, she isn't able to freely defend with Travail, and more like, well, we have this tool, and that means we could still do some pretty cool anti-zoning stuff with this tool in the
Right,
same way that Soul can, even if it's not quite as consistent at doing it.
right. And to,
And
I'm sorry, go ahead, Blue.
it's a 1 to 4 tool. So when we are at range 1, we are now starting to get into the range 1 tools that aren't just, yeah, bro, play slows, they're great. It's
So,
another slow, but it's a slow that catches cross and is very easy to confirm hits with, which means also that our Tension Rush that we looked at earlier and our Let's Rock, we have an additional tool to confirm it.
and
Tension
a
Rush notably loves the armor that Travail gets as well.
now it can trade with sweep on defense with
Yes.
that armor. Now I have 6 effective defense, which gives me the same defensive stats as Night Raid. So and to be explicit about what Blue's saying about Night Raid Vortex on Soul, that's something that he would use at range 1 again, as Blue said, to catch cross, but also as just like a really consistent boost delivery mechanism because that card's probably going to hit. And it's something that is very very difficult to get away from. Um, if they grasp it, you rush back in. If they cross out, you catch them. And if you're at range 4, you can probably safely move in with it. For those use cases, with the exception of losing to sweep on if I'm defending with it, Travau is basically doing the same thing as all the same things as Night Raid Vortex, and I just need a way to mitigate this weakness somehow. Is that pretty much correct?
Yes, and notably, if you're worried about specifically that weakness, initiate with it.
Yeah, sure. And you want to be initiating a lot anyway. You don't want to be crutching on your defensive options. And when you would be defending with it, that is what Tension Rush is for.
Yeah, when we need to play a little bit of neutral game, we got Tension Rush, we got Let's Rock, which Let's Rock is a bet at range 1, but sometimes you just need to bet.
Yep, makes sense. Okay, so not as you said, utility. This is not overwhelming power. And honestly, on Soul, like Night Raid Vortex actually seemed like a very very big deal that my opponent has to worry about. But this is like I'm fighting a zoner. I'm fighting someone who is crossing out on me a lot. I have ways to deal with that so that I can leverage my actual cool stuff.
Yeah,
Okay.
and similarly, the boost also offers anti-zoning, but we'll talk more about boosts later.
Yeah, sure.
Sol Nascente. Sol Nascente is actually 2 different cards, depending on where you play it. So, um, I'm sure that you may have run into the term cross out before if you're watching this guide. What it means to cross out is, let me grab the training dummy. Let's say you're at range 3. So Giovanna is in the corner and Ryu is at range 3 in this example.
Yeah.
If Giovanna initiates with a triple kick, a 5-speed attack, Ryu can defend with cross and he will outspeed the triple kick, and after retreat 1, 2, 3 to range 6, that
Mm,
is the core idea of crossing out. Is even if cross isn't going to hit, you can use it to non-committally say no to assault and dive and sweep, or not sweep and also dust.
right. This is the thing that answers every side of that really scary range 3 mix up. But you'd better have something at range 6 or range 5 to play when you do that.
Yeah, which notably, Giovanna actually has a way to call out the opponent trying to cross out which is why I think the Tempestad is actually a relevant threat even on offense, because if you set this as an attack, the opponent might think, oh, well, obviously they would just play Ray if they had the Tempestad, so
Right.
not going to play against the Tempestad. And then when they eat Tempestad like a Dumbo, they won't make that mistake again. And then now we can start playing more honestly with our Tempestads.
Right. Now you never need to represent that threat again because they'll never forget that interaction. Okay. Sol Nascente, um, tell me about how this relates to crossing out. Is this just a way to catch that on offense?
Uh, that is if you play it on curve. But let's say you're at range 3, and now Ryu is initiating with assault because he's a season 3 character. If we play Sol Nascente and then we look and we go, oh, he played assault, back up, and now we're at range 2.
Right. Okay.
Oh, he played dive, step forward, and then he advances 3 and whiffs. It is a funny defensive tool that gives us a sidestep at range 3 or greater.
Interesting. And even at range 2, he plays Dust or something. He wouldn't. He would play Spike. But cool. I walk into range 1 and dodge it. It's just a 6 speed repositioning button that also sometimes
Yes.
hits.
And then if you play it as if you play it at range 1 to 2, a range where it actually hits, it is a on curve button that allows us to reposition and also confirm our ability, whichever shape it is, because we have an on curve button at range 2 that does not disrupt our positioning in the way that cross does necessarily.
Okay.
And hit draw after movement, staple some advantage onto that, and we're cooking with
Makes
Ray.
sense. Makes sense. Yep. Then I've got uh above curve at 2, get advantage. And we've talked about how card draw synergizes with advantage. We've also talked about how card disruption synergizes with advantage. Positioning also synergizes with advantage, and flexible positioning especially means I can say, cool, I will set the terms of the next strike, and the next strike is happening right now.
Yes.
Okay.
And you actually also get those benefits with Sepultura, although I didn't explain it in detail. But yes, when you play a Sepultura or a Sol Nascente and you staple Ray onto it, you're making the shapes more consistent, which means you're able to confirm value more consistently, and choosing where to position between, in the case of Sol Nascente, probably range 1 or range 3, because you're probably going to play this at 2. With
Right.
Sepultura, between range 2 and range 4, um, and you can look at your hands, look at your options, and choose which of those ranges is better for you during after timing.
Knowing what my opponent just played, knowing what the board state will be, because if they use a Tatsu or something, I'm taking the hit anyway. I know where they're going to land. Cool. I will move to where it will. I will be able to leverage offense in the new board state, not the old one.
Yeah.
Um, so it sounds like the dodge use case that you were talking about earlier is mostly a defensive concern. I would use it as an above curve range 3 option to get out of the way of something the way that I would use with cross. The offensive applications of this are for range 2, where it's underwhelming power, but I'm getting lots of other little things on it when I get advantage as well.
Yeah, or just like it's an on curve button. You can also save it as an EX and have a ghetto DP that has after positioning on it, which is
Okay.
pretty nice.
Yep, sure, that makes sense. Gotcha. Um so and one of the sort of downsides of using cross on a rushdown character is that it does deposition me a lot. And most people who are really, really happy at range 1 or 2 or 3 are not happy at range 5. So Sol Nascente being able to scoot me back a little bit or even a little bit forward while still being on curve, as you were saying, it's another option, but it's one that won't mess with me as much, right?
Yeah,
Okay.
and because Sol Nascente as an attack is specific in its utility and not like crazy, not like earth shattering, it's pretty safe to also just hold on to it and represent it as an EX threat in the mid to late game.
Right. Where I might need a DP to call out some crazy nonsense my opponent's doing.
So here is Sol Puente. We were thinking about range 1, and we saw a slow, And obviously, we have fast representation with Soul Nascente and then Cross and Grasp at range 1. Sol Puente is a shape that characters don't have by default at range 1, a mid speed. A very awkward and janky mid speed, because that's what Giovanna deserves. But a mid speed nonetheless. So, offense or defense, if we need to call out specifically sweep and focus at range 1, congratulations, we can do it.
Okay. So they are not safe to match this on offense or on defense against me at range 1.
Yes.
Okay.
Now, this is a commitment to play, but it's a commitment that I think is worth doing at least once, so that the opponent knows that you're crazy and you're
Right.
willing to do it.
Right.
Obviously, as mentioned a bunch of times, Tension Rush is good value for us, and it's value that we have a reasonable time confirming. So it's not necessarily just play Sol Puente, this card is sick. But also, you should play Sol Puente, this card is sick.
Yep. Yep. That works. I feel like this is the kind of card that I would be playing you, and you would throw it, and I would like wild swing something and beat it by accident, and then I would know that you could do it, and then the mental damage of that would lose me the game later.
That is exactly what Sol Puente is there to do, is deal exactly that mental damage.
Yeah, is lose strikes for the Giovanna player, and then have Giovanna's opponent go like, oh no, they'll play Sol Puente at me. Now what do I do at range 1? Now I'm afraid. And then you just run your offense.
Yeah, and notably, this also means that Sol Puente is a card where you don't necessarily want to drop the second copy of it, because the threat of it is potent at dissuading the opponent from playing slows, cards that otherwise you might have a little bit of trouble trading into.
Right, sure. It has kind of command grab logic where you might be very happy to boost tension rush first play of the game. If you have 2 in your hand, maybe hold on to the second one for a long time because your opponent needs to be afraid of it.
Yep.
Makes sense. Okay. And then
Ventania,
yes,
our real ultra, and a very funny one. Um, I used to not be a Ventania believer, but I've actually been playing a lot more of this card in recent times. And the reason why that is this card has almost no pressure put on it from anywhere else in your kits. You have spoilers, fairly good repositioning contained within your boosts, and relatively flexible ranges that also mean that you can just kind of stand at range 3 and wild swing.
right.
So if this card ends up in your hand, which is a very decent chance it will, you don't super need the boost, and it's kind of an expensive card. There's a decent chance you'll run into the EX, and 1 to 2, 7, 8 for 4 gauge is pretty good, even on defense. We talked about a boost delivery mechanism with Traval. This is another great boost delivery mechanism because it's an 8 speed that hits for 7. Sure, it's kind of expensive, but Giovanna spends gauge on Ventania, or she exceeds, or she uses or cancels. You kind of have to choose, but all of them are pretty reasonable.
Right. And I probably won't be changing cards a lot, right? That's not, I have card draw. I'm good. I'm
Yeah,
doing
yeah,
change
you
cards
have
every
plenty of
turn.
card velocity from your ability and triple kick
I,
alone.
I have plenty of movement, as you said, on my boosts and things like that. I'll be able to reposition. I probably don't need the move action. No gauge expenditure there. So like the universal game actions are probably not super appealing to me. So I really am talking about my payouts when I'm talking about gauge.
Yeah.
Um, does she generate enough gauge that 4 is not backbreaking for her? Is this reasonable to play while also still being able to do some cancel offense throughout the game, or is this like a hard commitment?
So remember we have tension rush, and also naturally we have block if we're really dying for gauge, and we have relatively consistent on curve options or guardy options. So we don't have trouble confirming hits.
Right.
The
And
only
these are also
real
kind of low damage hits, right? So I'm not going to end the game before I get to 4 gauge.
Yeah. The only real consideration is doing like one cancel into a strike, or playing Tempestad as an attack or boost for that matter. Both sides of it are a card that costs 1 gauge. And what I will say is that you can mount an amount of cancel offense. You can't go crazy with it, which luckily Giovanna doesn't need to go crazy with it. She needs to use it tactically more so.
Right.
So you can't go crazy with it, but you can do some of it while also still playing an endgame Ventania, if that is something that you desire.
Okay. So use it flexibly. It's a real threat that I can lean into. It is not my entire game plan, but I don't have an entire game plan. I have options that I can switch out as I need to.
Yeah, and a decent amount of flexibility because you don't actually have to decide this is a Ventania game or this is a cancel game or this is an exceed game until you've built like 2 or 3 gauge.
Right.
So your early game plan is going to look pretty similar no matter what, which is just hit the opponent, represent good mix-ups, play solid exceed.
Okay. And then in that mid to late game state, I'm starting to make decisions about how I'm going to spend the resources that I'm starting to accrue. If I see that the Ventania is already in my hand and I've got 3 gauge and I'm like, this cancel chain's looking kind of tempting, but also I could be throwing this out in a turn or two. That's a decision that I can make. And it sounds like, this is another situation where there might be a right and more right answer, but Ventania is not wrong, your exceed mode's not wrong, your cancels are usually not wrong. Correct?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
And I know this is like pretty lame saying like, "Oh yeah, you're playing a sandbox open world adventure character, make your own decisions in life, learn your own character." But
Yeah.
I kind of how it is with a character like Giovanna. She's a toolkit and it's more about knowing how you can apply your tools so that you can use them to kill the opponent. And obviously, I keep on going back to Ray, and it's not really relevant for Ventania because Ventania actually has competent defensive utility. It has competent offensive utility as well, but it's mostly kind of a meme because it has this before if you initiated close two.
Right.
That just is an incentive to not play this very good stable defensive shape on defense. But like you can just play it on defense. If the opponent decides that they want to die, then it's fine.
Yeah,
And
no
if they're
problem.
like, I'm playing against Ventania with all of my soul, then uh, you can leverage that in a lot of ways. And you can also just play it. It hits 1 to 4. It's speed 7.
Right. It's gonna hit unless they have like a speed dodge or something. You'll be fine. You can do it. Um so I've got my big payout option if I want it. I've got my sort of consistent pressure. I've got many consistent pressure options, but I'm using all of these things to just combined with the normals to just throw decent mix-ups and use my card velocity to run my opponent over with aggression, right?
Yeah, that
Okay.
is more or less Giovanna's game plan. And that doesn't really change no matter how you decide to use your gauge. It's just in what way do you think your gauge is going to be best spent bridging the gap in value that your cards might lack a little bit in killing the opponent?
Right. Okay, sure. Um yeah, I'm also noticing, I mean, so all these cards we've talked about, every single one of them hits at range 3. You mentioned that I have uh consistent wild swings. It seems like I would be having consistent wild swings at range
Yeah,
3.
you miss with Soul Nascente, but you do still get value out of it if you wild swing it at range 3.
Right.
So yeah, like if you're standing at range 3, Giovanna action wild swing is a pretty reasonable play, especially if you're at a middle to low hand size and you don't have any options you want to commit from hands. Because if they're not in your hand, they're in your deck, and your
Sure.
deck probably hits. So go for it.
Yeah, and you'll get most of what you want anyway. It'll still be a mix up. It'll be fine. So it sounds like then a big part of my game plan in looking at some of these boosts that have some movement on them, a decent amount of my plan is going to involve getting to and sticking to range 3 as best I can.
Range 3 is a range that you really like, and um, there are some tools that you have that naturally end you at range 1, and leaving range 1 when you no longer have value to get out of range 1 is another kind of like execution thing that you have to learn with Giovanna. I will simplify, and by that I mean I will give you a card combo that is pretty reasonable, although relies on, as always, Ray,
Yep.
to let you leave range 1 and set you back at a more neutral distance. You can do Ray, and then you can play Cross at range 1. Now we talked about how range 2 or range 3 crossouts are kind of awkward. Range 4 is a competent range for us. We have Travau and Tempest out, although we just consumed one to gain advantage and move back to range 4.
Right.
So once we go to range 4, what are we doing at range 4 with our advantage? Well, we can play Travau, or alternatively, we can boost Step Dash.
And now we're
Step
at
Dash gives us a before
range
close
3
1.
again, or we're effectively at range 3 again, but we've got the before effect.
Yeah. And
Okay.
then with Step Dash, we now have our range 3 mix up online. So Dive, Dust, Sepultura, Triple Kick, Slash.
Okay.
We are back in the game as far as being able to run our stuff.
Okay. So defensive cross at range one would do the same thing. It's just less consistent because it has to be at range one to enable this, and that then it's doubly it loses speed dice and it's below curve. Um,
Yes.
but step dash then is for getting from range four to range three. It sounds like.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Step Dash also serves important utility for us, especially in the early game, as a neutral tool. You may remember when I talked about Soul's Flame of Corruption, I was like, oh yeah, before close one, really strong. It lets you confirm hits, and confirming hits is a big deal.
Right.
This is exactly that same tool. It's just you replace all the conditional plus power with draw. So this is a non-committal way to cycle our hands, and we can cancel it or we can choose to not cancel it, and both are reasonable options depending on our priorities. And chill on this before close one or cash it out immediately if we cancel it.
Right. So I've got at range four at opening positions. Suddenly, dive is very very strong with the foreclose one. Um, Slash is cool. Sweep is cool. Dust is cool. All of these are cool. All of my range three cool mix-ups are cool. Um, all that's enabled with step dash. Even on
Yeah, this
defense,
is this is actually what I would argue is the thing that you're losing if you hold Sol Nascente
as an EX.
as an EX, which
Right.
is why it's nice that we have Ventania to kind of cover that same use case.
Okay, yeah, I get you. So we do have the sort of the real DP shape. It's just a super expensive one, rather than crutching on kind of. I think you called it like a ghetto DP. Um.
Yeah,
Okay. So step dash is a neutral offense enabler. Do we want to like officially transition into talking about boost? I know we've sort of done both as we've been going here. Um. But we've got
yes.
so we've mentioned tension rush. We've mentioned step dash. We've obviously mentioned Ray, which is your do everything tool. Where do
Yeah,
we?
Ray is so important that I wanted to talk about it so that it's on your mind and you're reading all of these as what if I raid onto this? What would that look like?
Right, right. Where do we go
So
from here then?
let's go down the line. Let's start with beatdown.
Okay.
So if Ray turns cards into Tempestads and gives you the flexibility of Tempestad while also maintaining a mix-up, Beatdown turns every card into Triple Kick, but without the part
Right.
where you spend Force. It's kind
Okay.
of a niche tool because Triple Kick is a card that we like playing just because Triple Kick is great. But I have used Beatdown and had it be reasonable. I think that Beatdown is a great option if you intend to play, for example, Slash, because Slash gives you the other half of what you want on Triple Kick anyways.
Right. Okay. So this is another way to do the Ray gain advantage on triple kick. It's just you're using beatdown and slash advantage and card draw, same combo.
Yeah,
Okay.
which that's another thing about Giovanna, similar to Soul. She's really heavy on creative offense by looking at her hand and going, "Oh, I can staple this onto this and do this, and then after that I can do this into this because on the last turn I gained advantage because I did this."
Right.
So, it's really hard to be prescriptive with a character like this, a character that is a toolkit, because in Exceed, every character has about 30 cards in their deck. That means there's a bajillion combinations of hands that you can see in any given game, and the optimal way to play out any given hand is going to be slightly different.
Yep.
So I can't really give solutions. I can just give potential solutions.
Sure. And I mean that's not even taking into account that it's a two-player game. Right. If it was
Yeah.
solitaire, that's a lot of combinations. But you're dealing with unknown information. You're dealing with an opponent who has tendencies. Exceed is the reason that we start the lesson with Exceed is not a solved game is that it's not a solved game. But for Giovanna's purposes, that means that I'm going to have to, like, by necessity, any guide on her is going to be like, figure it out, color outside the lines a little bit. Like, you have these tools, use them. You just might find cool new ways to use them that we're not going to mention.
Yeah, and in that regard, Beatdown is a tool that doesn't read as being super cool because, well, if we want the value of Beatdown, we have Triple Kick to do that, and card draw is a thing that we already have a bunch of. But, sometimes you want a shape that isn't exactly Triple Kick, or you want a shape that has higher printed power, or this or that. So Beatdown does still serve a purpose, and it's more about finding the opportunities where Beatdown is what you want over Triple Kick
Right.
to use it. Something to note, numerically speaking, is this is one force card, and one gauge to cancel means that's one force. This is basically baking a CC into your change cards action into your strike.
Yeah, okay.
So numerically, it's not crazy, but when you're adding a hit draw 2 onto your hit draw 1, or maybe it's a hit draw 2 as well, we're baking so much card velocity into our strike actions that we can just move a bunch of cards around and keep pressure that way.
Okay, so card velocity doesn't necessarily just mean deck into hand. It's also just like movement of stuff into different areas that is like kind of like by it's like it's that's why we call it an engine, right? It is
Yeah.
generating value by spinning. So move
And
for
in this
move.
regard, moving cards from gauge back into your hand for a character that can relatively consistently hit is a reasonable option, not because we're dying for draw, but because it never hurts to have more draw, because maybe the second copy for the EX is 3 down
Sure.
in your deck of 13 or whatever.
Sure. Okay. So the output of my machine is always going to be goodness points, and I'm trying to raise the value of goodness points however I can. The inputs of my machine could be cards from hand, it could be gauge and card from hand, it could be a couple combinations of things that lead into similar effects. But what I need in the moment is going to depend on kind of what I have and what I can use.
Yes.
Okay, cool. That is an interesting way to think about value that I have never considered before. I'm into this. In practice, though, beatdown is tough to use because triple kick is such a good shape. But there are going to be times when I'm at range 1 and triple kick is a little bit more of a commitment, and I can put it on sweep or something.
Yeah, that's another reasonable use of it, and a really scary one because now you're talking about a sweep that has draw 3 on it.
Yeah, sure. Draw 3, discard 1, consistent, easy to hit with shape. But in times when triple kick is not good, or is not my best option, it still has to be my best option by at least a gauge worth of goodness point for it to be worth it to do this. But that could be, I could see that happening.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. How?
Microdash
Yeah. How about microdash?
is a much more interesting tool to think about. So this is a move 1, advance or retreat 1, draw 1. So in terms of force efficiency, it is better than using this card to do a move action or a change cards because it is a move and change cards at the same time.
Right.
And it is cancelable. So we get action compression out of it being cancelable. And also, if we decide after moving and drawing that we like our positioning and want to cash that out immediately, we can turn the 2 force that we spend, the gauge and the card, into 2 forces worth of value, but it is still our turn.
Right. Okay.
Uh,
And
in other words, if we're at range 2 or something and we want to be at range 3, we can step back, also get a card draw to keep ourselves efficient, and then cash out on that by playing like a dust or a triple kick or a slash or any number of other things because we love range 3. Heck yeah, range 3.
okay, so microdash is a way to get here. I need to do my effects on this card in the prescribed order. I advance or retreat and then I draw. I don't get to
Yes.
decide beforehand, but I do get to decide before I cancel. And
Yes.
if I want to increase the, so if I've got a Tempestad in my hand and I'm ready to play it, for example, I'm like, cool, I'm good at range 3. I can chill. But if I need to leverage that card I just drew or something else that I need to start offense with, that's an option. And I know that
Yeah.
after I've drawn.
And say you move from range 4 to range 3 or from range 2 to range 3. Well, we're at our favorite range now. Maybe you cancel it and then just like Giovanna action wild swing because again, a lot of our options hit at range 3 anyways, and we have a strong and multi-pronged mix-up at range 3 that has a decent amount of redundancy between dive slash dust esque shapes, slash esque shapes,
Yep.
sweep and sweep esque shapes. So, and then also this card that is bad, especially at range 3, but you know what it is.
It still hits though. They can still be afraid of the mix up even if they're not afraid of that card, especially if you wild swing. Um I haven't even been asking about like evaluation of attack versus boost because I feel like as we get into these more utility shapes, it's going to be very, very tough to say like this is always an attack, this is always a boost. These are all going to. This is a toolkit. I'm going to use the things when they're good, right?
Yeah, more or less. And in that same regard, this is a tool. It's a tool that does something that we like, because we're a range 3 focused character. This is also a tool, and it is a tool that does something we like because this is precise movement that is action compressed, and that is something that the Guilty Gear normals do not offer you innately.
Right. Right. You have kind of big chunks of movement that you can do with action compression, or you can take the move action and pass your turn. This is both.
So this is a good way to do a little bit of footsies on a character that is about doing a little bit of footsies.
Okay. Usually to get to range 3, but get to range where you can hit, get some cards out of it, run your offense,
Yeah, who knows?
or
Maybe your hand is much better at range 1 than range 3 because you have a bevy of slows, you got your grasp in hand, maybe you got a bit of gauge and you have a ray and a cross
sure.
and then you have like the step dash for follow up. Like I don't know what your hand looks like. I believe in your ability to evaluate your hand and determine the range that you should be stepping with when you decide to use micro dash.
Yep. Or whether you're going to use it at all, or whether you're going to run your attacks, and also whether you're going to cancel it. There are many decisions that we're making whenever we're playing any of these cards because Exceed's a hard game. But because
Exceed can be a hard game, that is true.
Giovanna's a toolkit character, many of these options are going to be weighed pretty like it's going to be difficult to weigh some of them. Shall we move on
Pursuit
to pursuit?
is a funny boost. It's now close 2, which means we get to, in another force efficient way, move forward, which obviously we have a lot of ways to generate cards, but having force efficient ways to move between both microdash and pursuit, and spoilers, trigger, if we need to use it, which is on Ventania, means that the opponent can't necessarily escape. But close 2 is kind of funny because we don't necessarily always want to close 2. It kind of depends on exactly where you started from. If a close 2 is good or not.
Right.
So that can be a little bit of inbuilt awkwardness. This also has a battery effect on it. Hit add this to your gauge. So if we confirm a hit after we do our close 2, we get lots of value off of this. This is
Right.
this is another tool that allows us to generate gauge in addition to Let's Rock and Tension Rush, which is another part of why I would say that Giovanna has relatively good natural gauge generation, which means that all of our how do we use gauge options, we can be a little freeform with like, oh yeah, we can do a bit of cancels and also still like Exceed or Ventania. It's just we have to be very precise with what we're choosing to spend our gauge on if we're trying to go into using multiple leveraging multiple tools.
Right. Um, this is not cancelable. It is a neutral play. It works similarly to Let's Rock then, where I'm saying like by doing this, I'm committing to having a defensive option that can confirm my battery effect, right?
Yeah, and in that regard, because it's a close 2, say you're closing from range 4 to range 2, it would be nice to have, for example, Sol Nascente in hand,
Right.
especially EX Sol Nascente to confirm that hit.
Right. Okay. Just something above curve because if I'm playing it, it's probably it. I would love to have the gauge generation, but
Yeah,
the thing that is probably causing me to do it. How do I put this? The thing that is causing me to play it in the first place is probably that I need to move. I was going to need to
yeah.
move anyway. This is just like a
You're
nice, convenient way to move.
Yeah, if you're
Um,
out of position, this is a great way to move back in. If you're at range 5, you actually go to range 3,
right,
which I talked about how crossing out is a little bit awkward because it sets you at a range that's weird. If you cross out at range 2 to range 5, we talked about step dash as a range 4 follow up from cross, but we have a range 5 follow up from cross as well. So it's not like it's the worst play for us to do. It's just that we have to be okay with passing the turn back to the opponent when we are a range 3 focused character that has a very solid set of mix up options to keep them honest.
and specifically mix up options that we want to use on offense for a character ability and for speed dice.
Yes, but we at least have Tempestad and
Hmm.
reasonable card draw for access to EXs to confirm the hit. And if we're
Okay.
confirming the hit, we're confirming the gauge.
Okay. So be careful when you're moving to range 3 with this. Make sure you have something to do that will work on your opponent's turn. But you might because you're Giovanna and you have good card draw. You have good fast shapes.
Yeah.
Okay.
I talked about Step Dash. It's another potent combo enabler and neutral tool, and it is viable to cancel it or to not cancel it, depending on your priorities. A lot of that is actually going to be dependent on if you're using it early or late, which is basically, do I even have the gauge in the first place? But you can do it both ways, and
Right.
it's good. Solana Sente is a tool. Stepdash is, on balance, probably a more potent tool, but they are both just tools, and they're tools that serve kind of opposed purposes. Stepdash makes you come in from long range into a closer range. Solana Sente is a non-committal tool in the mid range, or a on curve but relatively committal tool in the close range.
Right. So I'm using if I'm going to be like there is competition because I might need Sol Nascente later and I'm playing Step Dash now, but they don't do the same thing. And if I don't need one, odds are I need the other. So the decision of how to use this card will kind of be made in the moment for me. It's
Yeah,
just that I'm giving
it,
up.
it
I can't rip the card in half. I'm giving up both sides of it.
yeah, and like if you're at range 4, range 5 is funny because you only have Travao, but you know what? It's a Travao that has before close 4 on it effectively, so maybe that's fine.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Um. So again, tool. You've given some. I mean, before close one is strong text. You put it on grasp. Now you're going above curve. You made a DP. There's lots and lots and lots of ways to make before movement with really any character with like good fast buttons.
Yeah, and of course we have extra copies of some good fast buttons, an extra copy of a reasonable slow button. This funny card that has funny interactions if you put before close 1 on it, because it effectively becomes Ken's Tatsu,
Oh, true.
where
Yeah.
it ignores guard at range 2 or range 1, which still is like not amazing. But you know what? We do have that grasp threat that you were talking about at range 2.
Yep.
So maybe the opponent will play a slow, expecting us to play a grasp, and now they ate Sol Puente,
Yep.
and you laugh at their face.
It's a mix up enabler in addition to being an on curve just value enabler. I can do it both ways, and again exceeds a 2 player game. I need to keep in mind my opponent's tendencies. How about tension rush? I know we've talked about
I
it
already
quite a
talked
bit.
about it a bit.
Yep.
It's a neutral tool. It's a neutral tool that you can kind of think as being the opening play to some of Giovanna's very potent 2-turn setups, where if the opponent chooses not to contest them, then you make great value off of it on the second turn, while still being able to make reasonable value on it if they contest it on their turn.
Right. Especially if I have Tempestad in from
Yes,
that gauge. Right.
which, even if you don't have Tempestad, you can bluff like you have Tempestad,
Hmm.
and the opponent doesn't know whether or not you actually have it. And say they played a slow to cover the Tempestad, if you play triple kick or slash, you're still doing pretty reasonable in that trade. They have to go
Right.
kind of deep into the Yomi layers to get away from a thing that doesn't at least allow you to trade.
Right. Yeah. And if they're on the wrong Yomi layer, you either win clean with something or you. I mean the worst case scenario is that you lose a strike for less than you would have lost a strike before because you have some armor now. That's not such a
Yep,
bad worst case. Okay. Um, do you find yourself playing Tension Rush more often than Sol Puente?
on balance, yeah.
Okay. Oh, but we
I
do
play both a reasonable amount because Sol Puente is an important threat to
right,
make sure the opponent knows exists.
right, and as we were saying earlier, first Tension Rush is super free. Maybe second Tension Rush, be careful, you're losing a copy of a threat they need to know you have.
Yeah,
Okay.
and but like it's another nice tool, and it's a nice tool that's on a kind of mediocre tool, especially because Tension Rush is good at 1, 3, arguably 4. Things get weird past that, but like depending on the exact situation, you could make a reason to play it at 5 if you have like a step dash cancel into it.
Right. So
Uh,
lots and lots of pretty easy pretty easy ways to get value out of Tension Rush. Lots of flexibility, lots of situations compared to Sol Puente, which is like you are using this at range 1 or range 2 with step dash.
or you're wild swinging at range 3, and at least you got a card that hits.
Yep. Yep. Okay. And then Trigger, you mentioned is kind of like Ventania is being sort of uncontested in your kit. Is that because Trigger is sort of redundant with other stuff?
Yeah, we have step dash, we have micro dash, we have pursuit, we have dash, the regular old dash on slash.
Right.
And because we have some redundancy in the cards that kind of look like slash department, we don't necessarily need to actually ration out our slashes, even though slash is obviously a card we still appreciate.
Right.
And because we have a bunch of ways to kind of move back in and do some footsies to different ranges, the close three effect on trigger, even though it is effectively another copy of slash, isn't something that we need to use game by game. Obviously, if you decide I don't want to use Ventania and I would much rather use slash, then you should probably boost trigger instead of boosting dash.
Right. Now I mean like so uh either Ventania is going to be relatively uncontested in our kit because we're not going to be using trigger, or slash is going to be incredibly uncontested in our kit because we have triple kick and also trigger. So we'll never have to use dash. We'll be able to play slash how we want. So either way, this is an, an enabling redundancy. I'll call it.
Yep.
Okay.
And in that regard, it's pretty easy to just kind of hold on to this card, find the EX for it, and then play the EX if you want it. It's also pretty easy to go, I kind of need two force right now, and then play it as two force.
Right.
It's also pretty easy to go, I would rather play my slashes this game, so I'm gonna boost trigger.
And
Like,
never have to boost dash. Right. Okay.
yeah, like this card, it is a medium to low impact decision point, but it is a decision point you'll eventually probably have to make some kind of decision on. But it's not one that's like the end of the world. It's just whatever feels right in the game that you're playing with the board states that you're working with.
Right. Okay. That's all the specials. That's all the ultras. That's all the boosts. Do we want to talk normals briefly?
Yeah, let's talk about normals. Let's do them in descending order. So grasp, um I talked a lot about how awesome Grasp is for Soul and May because they can confirm plus power very trivially onto it.
Yeah.
With Giovanna, we don't necessarily get those benefits because the goodness points that we're buying, even though they're free, really just require us to hit, and we can hit with plenty of things. So we're not dying for Grasp. We do appreciate playing EX Grasp as a defensive option because Roshan characters love their defensive options.
Right.
But we also can get pretty solid value out of Let's Rock, the boost on Grasp. So this is kind of an either or, depending on exactly what you need type of thing. Giovanna is so toolkitty, even the normals become toolkitty.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, that sounds right for this kind of character. And you already talked about like Let's Rock does something similar to Tension Rush, where we're enabling our big Ray combo. If we got an EX, if you've got an above curve option, it is anything that's likely to hit, and it's
yeah,
pretty easy to hit with her.
yeah. Um, so Grasp is a reasonable thing. It's not something that we're dying for. We really love playing slows at range one when we're there, and
Right.
then we obviously also can play a pretty mean cross because we have competent options at range four. Which moving on to cross is another option that hits. I would say that one of Giovanna's selling points as a character is that she's relatively comfortable with crossing out because we have Trigger, we have Pursuit, we have Travail, we have Tempestad. We have a lot of tools that allow us to get back in, and also we kind of want to make distance anyways, just so that we can work our way back to range three where we're really cooking.
Right.
So we appreciate cross as a defensive option that exists and isn't suicidal for us to play more so than, oh yeah, I'm like dying for a hit or I'm dying for range five because I need to zone you.
Right.
Um, Area shift is a boost that, similar to the other characters, it lets us switch the polarity between range one and range two by pulling and generating gauge at the same time. Between range one and range two, we probably often prefer range one to range two. But you might have a hand that you like at range two more than range one, and we're never going to push with it, so don't even worry about
Yeah.
it.
Don't bother. Honestly, but it sounds like if you are at range two, one of the things that you would be happy to play relative to what you would be happy to play at range one is cross. So
That is true. That is kind of
most
the awkward thing about it.
yeah, mostly you're gonna want to go to range one with it. Um, uh, and I mean cornering people, generating gauge with it. There's lots and lots of uses for area shift. It is another very flexible tool. How about slash? We've talked a little bit about it here and there.
Yeah, Slash is a card that we appreciate. Even though it moves us closer and we don't necessarily love range 1, we're competent at range 1. So Slash is a tool that we can play, and especially because we have a hit draw 1 implicitly baked into it, or potentially even a +1 power and hit draw 2,
Right.
which +1 power and hit draw 2 on Slash is very spicy.
That then it's a maxed out triple kick
Yeah, more or less.
that I don't even have to pay for. I guess I pay a gauge.
Yeah, and triple kick, of course, in that instance draws, but draws 4, but
Oh God, yeah, you're right. But merely drawing 2 and gaining advantage. Hey, that's basic mode. Ray triple kick. That sounds pretty good.
yeah, it's good stuff. Again, the exceed mode, I don't super love it because of my own considerations. You're not me though. You
That's
might
true.
like it a lot more. I know a lot of people have found great success with it.
Yep.
And as I mentioned when talking about Ventania and also triple kick, we don't have a ton of pressure on Slash as a shape, but also we appreciate the redundancy of triple kick and Slash to maintain the I have a speed 5 threat mix up.
Right.
So you can play it, and you can play it kind of however you want because it's not a card where you need to be rationing it. You don't need to be rationing pretty much any of your fasts because you have things that serve their purpose or other things you prefer to be doing anyways. And with Slash, rather than the other ones where it's like, well, that means you might want to boost Let's Rock so that you can do some cool turn setups. And with Cross, like, well, you probably want to be like doing a 2-hand setup where you do Ray into it or something so you can continue your offensive momentum. With Slash, use it when it feels right. Hold it for the EX for a potent defensive option because again, rushdowns love defense.
Yep.
You can't really use it wrong, and because we don't have a lot of pressure on it, the only thing you really need to be concerned about is if you're playing against a character from an older season or Anji Mito from season 7, they have a boost called Matsuri Rock Parade or Reading that
Hmm.
can force you to play Slash. But if you have EX Slash, it's kind of hard to actually beat it cleanly. So it's not the worst thing to have in your hand as a potential Matsuri/reading target.
Right. Sure. And that's true of all normals, but it's the consideration there is just that like there's no other restriction on Slash other than that.
Yeah, and
Okay.
like it's pretty fine to just hold it and get that EX because you can do a lot of great work with the EX when you actually do find it.
Right. And you probably will pretty quickly, or not quickly, but you have a higher odds of finding it in a reasonable amount of time because of all of your draw.
Yeah, and you can pretty safely hold on to cards because you have other cards that can do them. So like, what if instead of Slash, you decide I don't actually want to be reading weak, but I want to have a EX 5 speed threat? Well, you can hold on to triple kick instead,
Sure
and then
can.
you're going to be playing your slashes more in the early game instead of your triple kicks.
Right. Or you spend them on a dash. You've got other stuff you can do with it.
Yeah.
Okay.
You have flexibility because you don't have a ton of pressure on this shape as something that you need to be representing consistently.
Right. Okay. And we talked about dash already as sort of like the analog to trigger. They do most of the same things. You can get out of the
Yeah.
corner with this one. Neither of them seem incredibly relevant, but sometimes you need to move 3, and you have ways to move 1 and 2. Now you have a way to move 3.
Yeah, maybe you're playing against a season 7 character and they threw you into the corner, then dash actually is meaningfully different from trigger and you
Yep.
can uncorner and now you're at range 3 and hey, cool, we got all these cool range 3 options that we can play.
Yep. And including an on curve one other than the slash you just threw away, so your mix up is still alive. You've got lots and lots of
Yeah.
ways to make that happen. All right, cool. Tell me about dive. It also hits at range 3.
It does also hit at range 3, which notably now we're getting into the cards where we can look at Wild Swing Geo again and be like, "Oh man, look at all these cool cards that we can also hit with that aren't our specials."
Yep. So dive, you get that. Also gets enabled by Ray.
Oh, it gets super enabled by Ray.
That sounds like that actually is ridiculous with Ray. On curve gain advantage with dive. As long as you got some to play at range 1.
Yeah. It's
Okay.
and in a similar regard, Dive is a card that loves boosts in general. So like you can do like, and this is kind of committal, but you can do like Ray cancel into Tension Rush or Let's Rock, and you are throwing around down a lot of stats on the board. Your passing turn, but if the opponent does not have a way to contest that level of stats, then you have reasonable ways to cash in with triple kick or slash at range 3, a different normal at range 1 or 2. Because if you're playing Tension Rush, you also have armor. You can play one of these.
Right.
And then if they don't, well, you can play dive.
And now you hit for 6,
And
maybe more if you canceled again beforehand. But now you got all
yeah,
this awesome stuff. Okay.
similarly, 2-turn setup enabler. If you play these and they're afraid of the Tempestad and they don't contest, then you can do Ray into dive, and you're
Yep.
confirming a lot of value that way.
Yep. Basically the same setup,
It-
but in reverse order, right?
yeah, yeah,
You aren't doing you're doing Ray first instead of second.
yeah. So and then also exceed mode
Yep.
plus power. So even if if you play your dive at range 4, plus power, 6 power, hit draw 2. Sure, I'll trade even into sweep and also draw 2 into your sweep.
What a trade down, Blue. Like
Yeah, what a tragic trade.
definitely the most soul crushing loss I've ever made on initiation is trading even in the sweep and drawing cards.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah,
Uh
this seems like a staple offensive tool for her. No matter how I'm using it.
yeah, also step dash enables it because now at range
Yes.
4 you can dodge slows.
Yep. Okay. So man, like half my boosts work. It turns out, range 3 mid speed works very well with the range 3 character.
Yeah, yeah. So speaking of range 3 mid speeds, Dust.
Yep.
Dust is a shape that we appreciate because Dust does not beat slows through positioning like Dive and Sepultura does. It just beats them. It just crushes the hell out of them.
Right.
And we like range 3. We don't necessarily like leaving range 3. So Dust is a card that is nice because it does not change positioning, which that's the funny thing about Dust. For a lot of characters, they don't mind losing to Dust because it does not change positioning.
Yeah.
But for a character like Giovanna who likes range 3 and doesn't necessarily want to leave range 3, not changing positioning means that Dust is actually better than it is for a lot of characters that might necessarily be throwing it out at the 2 to 3 range that Dust hits at. Also, don't forget implicit hit draw 1 on it if we initiate with it, which is good stuff.
Right. Okay.
Means that when you win with the mid speed, you win even harder with the mid speed than you do with normal characters.
Right.
Um, I didn't talk about Ukemi. Ukemi is the same as it is with every character. Giovanna, because she's like a toolkitty character, appreciates this kind of boost more than Solar May necessarily do, because Solar May can just kind of shrug off a boost setup and be like, well, like you'll win this time, I'll win the next time, and I'll win twice as hard as you just did.
Yeah.
Giovanna doesn't necessarily have that privilege, so being able to contest opponent boosts and then reverse the momentum and go into her own setup is something she really appreciates.
Right. Okay. So she's using it like a more conventional character who doesn't have gigantic stats would use it. You find your opponent's biggest boost, you get rid of it, you maintain offensive momentum if you want to while you do it.
Yeah.
Okay. And then how about
Um,
flawless defense?
False defense. Now, I don't need to tell you that we have a bunch of shapes that hit at range 1 to 3. We have Sepultura, we have Triple Kick, we have Sol Puente.
Yep.
Sol Puente, especially, really loves FD because now it is a ignore guard button that is speed 3 that has 4 guard on it.
Yep.
That is significantly harder for the opponent to actually stop than the 0 guard version of it that it is printed. So FD is a tool that we appreciate. It's not a tool that we necessarily need to leverage in the same way that Mayor Soul do, where they're like, holy crap, FD gives me everything I want in the entire universe. And we love Dust.
Right.
So there is a real decision to be made here. Toolkit character gonna toolkit.
Right.
Giovanna
When I'm
obviously appreciates the gauge
mm,
because she has a lot of appealing uses for gauge.
but
So
I might also be canceling it occasionally in order to throw that offense around right away.
yeah, yeah, you might find a checkmate setup where the opponent just simply can't beat a triple kick or Sepultura that has 4 guard on it anymore,
Okay.
or a slash for that matter.
Sure. All right. So use it when my normally on curve cards are out of position. Use it to deal with stuff that would normally lose to grasp or cross. Um, Use it to deal with DPs. I'm not using it for power confirms the way that I was on May, for example. But I
Yeah,
am using it for hit confirms, and that's good for me for my action, my character
yeah,
ability.
and when you're in exceed mode, although this is expensive, this is I'm sure you're already starting to see why I don't necessarily like the exceed mode because a lot of the best setups in the exceed mode are not 1 gauge setups; they're 2 gauge
They're
setups.
now 2 gauge
They're
setups, right?
FD into ability, Ray into ability.
badass
badass
into
into
ability.
ability.
Yeah.
These are all
And
expensive, so you have to really be rationing your resources and managing them well. And then you also have to take a turn at some point to get to the point where you can even do it.
right.
Which means you can't be spamming your ability in the way you can on front side, which means that you're with strike actions where you're not able to use your ability because you need to build gauge, kind of losing value, which means you have to shift how you're treating your um, gauge expenditures and how you're handling them.
Right. Because
Which also
it,
means that you might want to talk to someone that is more experienced with handling Exceed Mode Giovanna for your written guide as well.
sure, definitely. And because you exceeded in the first place, how do I put this? Because you exceeded in the first place, now you are pressured to get a good return on investment for your exceed. Because it is a
Yes.
committal resource now. So you're like, awesome, I was gonna do this one every turn anyway. Now I've exceeded. I spent a turn to do it, I spent gauge to do it. I'm gonna use this every time. Oh no, that's all my gauge.
Yep.
In order to justify the cost of it. I wasn't going to need to spend it, but now I do because I have buyer's remorse, basically. That's an
Yeah,
interesting
and that
tension.
opportunity cost is something that weighs really heavily on me because of my priorities as a player. It might
Right.
not necessarily weigh as highly on as heavily on you, and also you might just be like, I want to play Geo, but this character has lackluster power. Where can I find the power to buy?
Right. Oh my god,
There
there's
it is.
another
It's
side
on
to
your
this
Exceed
card.
mode.
Yeah, it's got a red number on it. Okay. So follows defense, cool cancel option, cool gauge generation option because I got cool ways to use gauge, but I really do like dust.
You do like Dust. FD is a tool that sometimes you like as well. For like both the cancel use case, which is a use case that I love shouting out because a lot of Guilty Gear characters look at this and go, ah, I can play this past turn, and then if the opponent contests it, I can probably force a trade that allows me to build gauge, and if they don't contest it, I get gauge for free.
Yeah.
Giovanna likes using it that way as well because she is a Guilty Gear character after all. But she doesn't necessarily need to use that. She has plenty of other tools to build gauge, and she likes the utility of dust an unusually large amount.
Cool. We've already talked about these two cards. Honestly, we talked about these cards at the same time we talked about Tempestad and Ray. Like these are things I need.
Yeah,
Sweep and
these are
focus.
these are these are your hell yeah value cards because this one is a hit. The opponent must discard a random card, draw one, which is amazing on sweep as a shape because it's just a strong shape.
Yep.
And this is a hell yeah hit draw one after draw one, so draw two on focus, which is an extremely safe shape.
Yep. Yep.
And draw when you're drawing more than one card, and I probably should have mentioned this with triple kick because it was relevant then as well. When you're drawing more than one card, the value of it also multiplies because of the just sheer velocity that you're getting thrown into you. So the after draw one on focus is pretty good. The hit draw one after draw one of a geo focus is pretty good in all caps.
Okay. Yeah. It's better than just. It's better than two cards. It's
Yeah,
something about. So there's like something alchemical about the speed at which I get the cards. Now I'm going resource positive on a strike, which is a big deal.
yeah, that's a huge deal, and that's why you love slows.
Okay.
Is that both of these are massive resource swings on safe, consistent shapes.
Okay. Sure. Does that make it very difficult to play their respective boosts?
Shit, man, you love badass just like every other character. You probably will still find opportunities to play it where it's correct.
Okay.
Um, Badass is badass. I love badass. I play it plenty. I don't like throwing away sweep without purpose, so I'm usually going to be doing badass cancel geo ability into some kind of on curve card or card that is now on curve. A dive, a sepultura, a triple kick, a slash. All great options that are probably going to win the strike. So there's reasons to do it. There's also plenty of reasons to play sweep. I'm not your dad. Play it how you think is good.
Yep.
What I will
Ask your.
say about
I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was gonna make a dumb joke. Please continue.
oh, please make your dumb joke.
I was gonna say ask your dad and see what he thinks if Blue can't tell you how he would play badass. I would love to know. Continue. Sorry.
But yeah, the gist with badass and sweep is I have found reasons to use both. I have found reasons to use both with most Guilty Gear characters. I love badass as a boost. It's a very badass boost.
It's true.
I love sweep as an attack. It's a very badass attack. You probably similar to me will find opportunities where you're like, man, I really need +1 speed and +1 power, and I need to strike right now. Well, congratulations, you probably have sweep in hand, hopefully, unless you already played it, in which case, sad.
Right.
But
What?
you also have other setups to get the same thing. You just have to work harder for it.
Sure. Okay. So this works in the same situations where your other sort of stat boost work. It enables similar things. Most of the things that Ray gets are enabled in some way by that +1 speed. This has +1 speed as well. You can play the same way. You're not
Yeah.
getting the advantage
So
out of it, but uh, dive above curve shapes,
yeah,
slightly
because we have a bunch of shapes that love +1 speed,
right.
and also we just generally love plus power for the same reason. Badass is a great boost for us for those reasons.
Sure. Okay. Then how about scramble?
Um, Scramble is not something we necessarily need to play very often because if Geo is being played well, then she should be ahead enough on resources compared to the opponent that they are scrambling anyways, if that makes
She
sense.
she's the scramble, or she's
Yeah.
causing the scramble already. Honestly, like at the very beginning of the lesson, one of the things that we mentioned was like if you are pressuring your opponent's resources, they're either going to be responding from hand and going low on hand size, or being forced to wild swing. But wait, let me just read this boost here. The opponent must respond with a wild swing. That's what's going to be happening anyway.
Yes, and also Focus has notable utility in our kit as a tool that allows us to go resource positive without any sort of weird awkwardness associated with it, like triple kick can do.
Yeah. Okay.
So
So
it's just a good shape, and it's made even better by our existence.
right,
So
it's too easy to mash. Scramble needs to make a specific use case, and we're going to be
play
making that use
you,
case anyway.
yeah, play you some focuses. You might find an opportunity where a scramble is correct. If it is, go for it. Toolkit character gonna toolkit. You're
Yep.
also not necessarily going to be running your opponent over every single game. So you might find an opportunity where they have had opportunities to like actually build up resources, and now a scramble is a pretty compelling thing to do. But I would generally say that focus is an attack that we would like so much that's and scramble is something that we can kind of approximate the utility of anyways when we're being run well, that we don't necessarily need to rely on scramble unless we're specifically trying to diffuse a setup.
Okay. Makes sense. And then how about block?
Block sucks and it's bad and you should throw it in the trash. And by that I mean gauge it with tension rush. Jokes aside, block is block. It serves the same purpose that it does for everyone. It's a card that you play when you want to fold a strike in a way that allows you to potentially generate value. We're not dying for gauge so badly that after add this card to your gauge at the end of the strike is something we're like, oh my god, gauge, the thing that I've needed in all of my life. We're just
Right.
like, ah, cool, gauge, the thing that I can make reasonable value out of, but I can also find in other ways.
Right. You have plenty of sources for it. Block could be force, which you also kind of want.
Yeah, and although force in our kit is mostly going to be a card that is getting gauged with tension rush, but yeah, a card in hand that we can gauge with tension rush is
Right.
basically force.
Okay.
Um, So block, similar to a lot of characters, it's something that you can play. It's something that you can rely on as a defensive option. Rushdowns love defensive options. That's also part of what we like about focus. Um, but it's not something that you're ever necessarily going to be happy to play because it can't even hit.
Yep. Yep.
And if the opponent,
I can't even draw cards off of it blue.
yeah, and not only can it not even hit, if the opponent calls it out with some kind of ignore armor option, then we can like actually lose, and that's terrible. So it's a thing that sucks to play for the same reason that it sucks to play for a lot of characters. Our economy is good enough that we can afford to actually block things, and who knows, maybe the opponent is like Potemkin, who has a much harder time generating resources, and he decides that he wants to play Heavenly Potemkin Buster really badly.
Sure. Yeah.
If you block it, you probably won. It's gonna feel bad for both him and you, but like your economy is good and Potemkin's economy is not, so you're probably fine. You also could, speaking of uses for block, you could just parry the card that you're afraid of if it's an actual reasonable threat.
Yep.
In the Heavenly Potemkin Buster example, letting the opponent hang themselves is like not the worst because they're committing a lot more than you are if you just parry it. But like say you're fighting a character that has like a real dominant ultra threat. Um I'm blanking right now. Chip. Zansei Roga, Ryu's got Metsu Shoryuken or um, or Metsu Hadoken, which are both reasonable parry targets. But Chip, Sanseroga, the famous Speed 9 attack that I'm sure a lot of Guilty Gear players are familiar with
Yep.
if they've been playing the set recently.
Yep.
You have kind of a bit of trouble dealing with that card. Just like get it the hell out of here.
Yep. That is literally what parry is for, is uh future proofing characters and past proofing characters too, to make sure that if your opponent has something that they just cannot deal with, get it out of there.
Yeah, so like if you find yourself in a situation where like you look at the opponent's reference card and you're like, wait, shit, I have
What
no
up?
answers to this card. That's what parry is for.
Yeah, get
Use
rid of it.
parry in those matchups. Otherwise, you're a pressure character. You want to be pressuring. Block nor neither parry nor block are going to advance your game plan such that you want to take a turn off using them so badly that it's not more than just like tension rush fodder or force for
Yep.
you a lot of the time, at least in my opinion.
Okay. Sure. And I think that advice holds true broadly for many, many characters, but for Geo in particular, I can see where that is particularly unappealing. So that is the entire kit then. Um,
It is the
it,
entire kit.
so it sounds like I'm doing things flexibly. I am doing things aggressively. I'm drawing a lot of cards. I'm running good mix-ups, and I'm taking advantage of very flexible setups to run my opponent out of options and make it so that my sort of lackluster power numbers don't really matter because they've run out of something or everything that will allow me to just keep on the pressure.
Yep.
Okay, cool. All
She
right.
is the pressure character.
It's interesting. I really do think that it's like I've heard so many people be like, "How do you win with this character? Why is she good? What am I doing with this character? I don't get it." I think it's like she's got good neutral, she's got good card draw, she's got good boosts, she's good at everything but number, and it is hard to and honestly specifically red number. She's got good yellow number. It's kind of hard to approximate that value. So I think that getting a sense of like how you pressure your opponent when you don't have big scary payout options like Soul or May would is is something that you kind of need to learn at the table. Like the guide is useful as a way to describe the toolkits, to describe the tools in the toolkit. But I think more than most characters, this is a character that people should probably go out and play a couple times and
100%.
get a sense of like, oh, it didn't matter that this threat had an answer when I played it. It was not safe when I played it. That's okay because I was striking so many times that I won on average, and my opponent didn't have a thing in hand to deal with it because I'm keeping the pressure on them. We can tell you that, but you do need to sort of believe that by playing it, I think, and get a sense of it on the table.
I also think that Giovanna will be great at telling you what you value as a player because you have several pretty reasonable options for how to spend your gauge. And depending on what you look at and go, man, this is really compelling, you might find another character that you like a bit more than Geo. Obviously, the thing that's nice about Geo relative to a Soul or a May or a Ken is that she can kind of do a little bit of everything, even if she's not going to like blow your mind with her outstanding options in any given area.
Right. Yeah. So she never there isn't anything that we've talked about that made like my monocle pop off. That made me be like, oh my god, she has that. That's not fair. The way that we did for Sol and May, like there's lower numbers on her cards. There's lower things, but that's that's okay because she's kind of doing everything pretty well, and she can leverage what her opponent can't do and pressure them that way. So she's kind of a, as you said, if you like Exceed Mode Giovanna and wish that was more central to her character, may we recommend, for example, the plus power people that we already talked about, Sol and May. Like there are other characters who might lean more heavily into that. Any other characters, Blue, that you would say are like Giovanna but slightly different?
So I mentioned Ken as well, which is another Red Shoto, and I'm gonna also take the opportunity to shout out my good boy Ragna the Blood Edge from season 4. All of those characters are rushdown characters of a different flavor. Another toolkitty rushdown character that is very focused on card draw is season 5's Jin Kisaragi.
Yep.
who has, in place of Giovanna's just free hit draw 1, a spend a gauge for after draw 2. So easier to confirm value, but value that you need to invest resources into doing. He also has one of the most disgusting overdrives in the game.
Yep.
Um, Noelle Vermillion from season 5 is another character that might be worth looking at. She is a fast rushdown character, similar to Giovanna. Um, you might also want to look at Milia, who is another fast rushdowny character that's very mix-up focused. Milia has even worse power than Giovanna, but arguably better mix-ups, and mix-ups that work at range 1 in addition to range 3,
Right.
and a bit more flexibility so long as she's stunning the opponent. So with Giovanna, you're getting kind of like confirmed value for free off of your ability so long as you're initiating strikes. With Milia, it's value that you need to get the opponent to start guessing wrong. But once they guess wrong, then it can be a death spiral for them. So
Right.
if you're looking for a character that's like more momentumy, but has like some stronger tools, but also like different tools, then Milia might be a character to look at. Um, if you like the toolkit aspects of Giovanna, but want someone that's like even more fundamentals focused and maybe a bit less mix-up-y, you might want to look at Bang Shishigami from season 5. He's
Okay.
a combination of a ninja character and a fast fundamentals character. So kind of similar to Giovanna in evasive, fast properties with kind of interesting shapes that accent normals well.
Okay, cool. So we've got some like different flavors of different things that Giovanna's doing, and they're represented in different characters. That sounds perfect. So if you are a fan of any of those characters, maybe give Giovanna another look. If you're brand new to the game and are looking to get into old Exceed and love Giovanna, those are some characters to try out. I realize, Blue, unless you have more strategic advice to give, that we glossed right over counterplay at the end of the lesson. Is there anything else you want to talk about before we wrap it up?
Not really.
All right. So in that case, we've talked all about all the geo things. My opponent, who is very competent, knows all of the geo things and is going to be playing to stop them. What are they doing, and how can Giovanna deal with that? What's the counterplay to her?
Um, Similar to with May and Soul, the counterplay is mostly to be answering her mix-ups, and with her especially, playing against your worst case is like pretty real, because of how her kit is shaped. So the opponent is probably going to be choosing what they're going to be beating from you, and if you're the opponent, you should choose what you're willing to lose to from Giovanna and play against other cards. Um, you're when she does Ray, you're going to lose the strike,
Okay.
and there's a decent chance you'll lose the next strike as well. You can make up value on the turns where she doesn't use Ray. She only has so many copies of it, and it, as I have impressed throughout this entire lesson, is an extremely important tool that she has many correct uses for, but she cannot use all of them at the same time. She only has 2 copies of Tempestad.
Right. Right.
Because of that, and also just because of how her kit is shaped, she does eventually need to start managing her options. She doesn't need to do it for a while, but she really likes playing EX attacks, and EX attacks make her actually lose those options.
Right.
So as long as you're outvaluing her on her off turns and keeping with her on her on turns, you're doing pretty reasonably. And in a lot of ways, it is on the Giovanna player to make sure that they have a way to keep things in her favor. And a lot of that is going to be leaning onto pressure, and then also leaning onto tools like Ventania, Ray, the strong 2-turn setups enabled by Tempestad, and Step Dash as a tool, and all those. But she does need to be using those correctly, and they're also all fundamentally interactive tools that you can
Sure.
call out in different ways.
Sure. Okay. And if my opponent is able to maintain their own resource game so that I'm having trouble pressuring them as Giovanna, all the stuff you're saying is kind of easier for them to do because they have tools to work with. So if they have good draw boosts and they're leveraging them well, if they're able to keep up with me in neutral so that they don't run themselves out of options, like all of this stuff is they're playing the game, right? They're like they have not auto lost to Giovanna. Giovanna's not auto lost to them, but
Yeah.
now we're fighting. Now we're playing Exceed, and whoever's playing Exceed better is going to win.
Yeah, and I think that Giovanna is usually going to be mostly just a if you're better than the Giovanna player, there's a reasonable chance that you're going to beat Giovanna. If the Giovanna player is better than you, there's a reasonable chance they're going to beat you. I don't think she has a very skewed matchup spread because she's very fundamentals focused and mostly works and mostly can get to consistently the ranges where exceed happens for pretty much everyone in the game.
Yep, makes sense. And I mean, in fact, one of the when people say the range where exceed happens, they frequently mean range 3, and she's particularly good there. So she's
Yep.
even got an advantage in that one spot. Okay, sure. Um, well, cool. So it sounds like I've got a character. I've got my opponent. We're going to be playing some exceed together. Um, I might be evaluating things a little bit differently than another character would, but mostly I'm just going to play exceed. And if I'm
Yeah.
good at exceed, I'm just going to win.
More or less. And I mentioned it a couple times. I do want to mention it explicitly and very clearly. In matchups where pressure is paramount, wild swings are your best friends. I found this to be extremely important when I fought Fight, the season 4 character, because he's a character that is expensive and very payout heavy. And that means that it's very easy for him to in a turn swing value in his direction in exchange for spending his resources.
Right.
That means that in the gaps where he is leaving himself low, you need to pressure. And that is important in a lot of matchups, deceptively important in a lot of matchups, even if they're not a character like Fight that blows out their entire freaking resource engine. And in that regard, if you're at the range where you can hit, range 3 especially, wild swings are your friend if you do not have options that you feel like you want to pressure with in hand or you need to rebuild your hand at the same time.
Right. Okay. So just keep tempo, keep aggression. You have tools to do it. But that is especially important if your opponent is kind of like resource fragile or payout heavy.
Yes.
Okay. Makes sense. Cool. I should mention, by the way, at the very beginning of this lesson, I was talking about how, like, as somebody who came up on the Ryu characters, the characters who put down big crazy stat boosts and then I win on my turn, I lost to a lot of rushdown characters. And it's because they knew how to pressure me. So again, if you are like me, who sees everything that Giovanna's doing and is like, why is that good? They're all answerable. None of the stuff that she's doing is crazy. Yeah, okay, then go lose to her. Because you will learn pretty quickly that there's more to exceed than building big good attacks. Giovanna is a character who seems to be very good at those parts of exceed. Is that
Yeah,
fair to say,
she's
Blue?
great at building little good attacks.
Yeah, a lot of them. All right, cool. Well, Blue, I would say another success, 3 in a row for us. Thank you so much for your time and your expertise here. Anything
As
else you want to
always.
mention? Yeah, no, it's been great.
And as I always do when I'm closing out these tutorials, I think that Giovanna is a very cool character, and I'm very sad that I don't see more Giovanna love on the Discord or online in general. So try her out. You might find a character that you enjoy because you like drawing cards or something.
Yep,
And
yep.
drawing cards is cool.
And please don't listen to the people who are downplaying her. She's cool. She's got good stuff going on. Um, hopefully, people at home who've been watching this, you've enjoyed it. You've learned something. Uh, Blue, I think, has done an amazing job of advocating for Giovanna. Hopefully, you agree and you go try her out. But with all that said, Blue, thank you so much. Really, really appreciate your time. Folks at home, thank you so much as well. I will see you all for the next one. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye. See you for biking.